There's this growing idea that I've noticed in the Pokemon fan base recently, especially among veteran fans of all places, which is that Pokemon stories don't really matter all that much, that they ultimately are just filler between the quote-unquote fun parts of Pokemon, which is the battling, catching, and trading. But here's my thesis, and it's that Pokemon stories absolutely matter, and that they are more important now than ever before. Pokemon is kind of a strange franchise because it can be understood in so many ways. There's Pokemon as an RPG, so the single player adventure where you step into the role of a Pokemon trainer. There is the multiplayer experience of Pokemon, which encompasses battling, trading, and the competitive formats like the VGC and Pokemon Showdown. There's also the social experience of Pokemon. Both the card game and the video games have elements of encouraging the player to be social and meet other people through Pokemon, but this is really doubled down in games like Pokemon Go. And there's finally the cultural lens of Pokemon, which encompasses the constant presence in global media, so the show, the movies, the merch sometimes. And all of these are valid ways to frame Pokemon, but in this video, I'm focusing specifically on Pokemon as an RPG because this lens is where story matters the most. And I'm gonna go through each generation later on in this video, and there are examples of when the story is a bit de-emphasized. It really affects your experience of Pokemon in that generation. In Generation 1, which I view as the blueprint for Pokemon games, you're a kid, you're going out into the world, a world of Pokemon, and your really only goal is to become the strongest and the best Pokemon trainer, the Pokemon champion. It's a really simple premise, but it's practically revolutionary because everything that happened, every obstacle in your journey was framed as something hindering your pursuit of becoming the champion, whether it's Team Rocket trying to steal your Pokemon, whatever was happening in Lavender Town, Gary being a huge jerk. It was all obstacles that were meant to prevent you from becoming the very best, and you as a trainer push past them and become the very best anyway. You were fighting for something, essentially. Generation 2, Johto brings these themes of legacy and discovery. You discover that there's a whole new region connected to Kanto. There are new Pokemon that have been discovered. You go on to fight Red at Mount Silver, which is a storytelling masterpiece. It turned your journey into one of succession. In this game, you weren't just becoming a champion, you were proving yourself against the legendary trainer from Generation 1. In Generation 3, the world gets bigger and the stakes get higher. A lot of people clown on the villain teams for being kind of goofy and their goals being really dumb, but the consequences were kind of real. Yeah, does it make sense that Team Aqua wanted to flood the world with water? I don't remember what their justification was for that in the games, but yeah, it's kind of dumb. At the same time though, what they caused were real environmental disasters. So suddenly your journey had global stakes, which I think was the first time this happened in Pokemon, where it framed you as a hero who ultimately saved the world or the region. And then in Generation 4, the narrative leans more heavily into myth and creation. There are mysteries and plot hooks that are established really early on. I think it was one of the lakes that you go with your rival to go see a legendary Pokemon, which is where you get attacked by the Starly and you find your starter. So that's established really early on. You come face to face with Cyrus, who is a man literally trying to reset the universe. There are the myths around Dialga and Palkia, Giratina and Arceus. And for the first time, the Pokemon story is kind of brushed up against some real philosophical questions around time and space and origin. In Generation 5, which I view as the gold standard, Pokemon Black and White was a soft reboot for the series. So, and I touched on this a little bit in the last video, but you were forced to embrace a whole new world with a whole new set of Pokemon. It was filled with really, really rich characters like Sharon and Bianca, and especially N, who didn't just battle you, he questioned the morality of Pokemon battles themselves. And then you have a direct sequel to these games that expand the world, showing continuity in a way that no other generation really has. Then in Generation 6, I think this is where the cracks started showing. Kalos had so much going for it. It had 3D graphics, mega evolutions, customization, but I think the story fell a bit flat. There are some really, really great story beats in this game, but I think that the Team Flare was probably one of the more cartoonish villain teams in these games. I don't think Lysandra was super memorable for me. And I think for a lot of players, this is when the idea that Pokemon stories don't really matter really cemented itself, because so much else was carrying these games. Kalos, again, introduced Mega Evolutions, which were so fun that I don't even think I really cared too much about anything else in these games. And in Generation 7, you have more interesting characters like Lily, Gladion, and Lucamine. Team Skull was a diversion from the true villains in the games. The Ultra Beasts brought real mystery, and the island trials kind of changed up the formula. This generation reminded fans that there are more and interesting stories to tell in the Pokemon world. In Generation 8 with Sword and Shield, I personally think these games have such an underrated story. I think the villains are kind of weak. I don't think Chairman Rose was that interesting or really threatening in any way, but Hop's story arc, man, Leon as the coolest champion, and then you have all these other side characters who have their own personal journeys alongside you. I love the Champion Cup, and I love how it changed the feeling of Pokemon battles in this generation. And it made Galar feel alive, even though the wild area did feel a bit half-baked. Then in Generation 9 with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, I think the shift to these games being open world definitely affected how the story landed for me a little bit. I still like the story in Scarlet and Violet. I just think that depending on the order of when you complete these quests, it can feel a bit disjointed, not a little bit disconnected. And I think that hurt it a little bit for me, but there are really, really strong character arcs that shine through. I didn't mention it in Generation 8, but the DLC for Pokemon Sword and Shield and the DLC for Scarlet and Violet are also really, really cool. They do kind of a similar thing to Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, where they expand the world. There's a sense of continuity where things are progressing past where the story ends, and just really fun to play in general. I think that when you zoom out a little bit, you see that every generation has kind of like a through line when it comes to its themes. You have Generation 1, which represents ambition, I'd say. Generation 2, which is one of discovery. Generation 3 brings the idea of nature and balance. Generation 4, you have myth and creation. Generation 5, morality. Generation 6 is one of evolving. Generation 7 is identity and family. Generation 8 is competition and self-growth, I'd say. And then Generation 9 is one of change and mystery. This, I think, is kind of the heart of why these stories matter to me, because they give shape to the whole experience. I think older players tend to value the multiplayer and the competitive aspect of Pokemon more so these days, which is fair. But for a lot of players, and for most players, the first way you encounter Pokemon is as an RPG. And without story, that RPG is hollow. And this is the bow that I kind of want to tie on this, which is that, at least for me, Pokemon is about adventure. So the graphics may be simple, they may be complex, they may even be a little bit buggy and unfinished looking, but it's the story that makes you feel like you're stepping out into a vast world, overcoming obstacles and facing the mysteries that lay ahead of you. And that's why Pokemon stories matter for me. They don't just justify the gameplay loop, they elevate it into something unforgettable. But I'm curious about what you think. Do you think Pokemon stories are underrated, or do you skip through the whole dialogue and head straight to the Pokemon battle? Let me know in the comments. Thanks.